There's a rumor going around right now that the UFC is looking to book the rematch between George St-Pierre and Nick Diaz at UFC 300. And Dana White went on the Full Send podcast, and shout out to Jedi Goodman, who does an awesome job getting little tidbits from podcasts like this. He says, Dana White says there is a super fight that just popped up a few days ago they are talking about. Says this fight does not involve Conor McGregor. And if you look on Twitter right now, a lot of people are mentioning George St-Pierre and Nick Diaz in an actual MMA match, which I think is a terrible idea. And I'm going to talk about that in today's video, why I don't like this fight, and also what fights I think should be added to UFC 300 if we are going to talk about those fights. Even here in December, looks like UFC 300 likely taking place in April, but you look at it here, even someone chimed in on this clip saying GSP is coming back to fight Nick Diaz. Now, first, let me say, if this is just a grappling match, I'm fine with that. I think a grappling match is fine, doesn't really have an impact on anything. And again, you're just grappling. It's not like anyone's getting seriously hurt here from any punches or anything along those lines. So I'm totally fine with a grappling match. But the rumor right now, like I said, is they're going to actually have an MMA fight. And let's talk about the reasons why I don't think this makes a lot of sense. Number one, George St-Pierre, I know he's kind of teased this and that here and there that, oh, maybe I'd come back and all that. I don't think he needs to. George St-Pierre has done more than enough in his career, a number of great title defenses. His last fight in the MMA cage was against Michael Bisping, and that was a fight that he ended up winning the middleweight title. Like, it's not going to get much better than this going forward. And look, if they were to fight between George St-Pierre and Nick Diaz, I would pick George St-Pierre all day, every day, even though he's a little bit older in this matchup here. But, again, he's 42. I just don't have any desire to see George St-Pierre fight again. Like, can't we let these guys just go off into the sunset and enjoy their careers? And St-Pierre doesn't need the money. He's doing fine. I live here in Canada. You look everywhere, he's doing those Bet99 ads. He's doing fine financially. So there's no reason for St-Pierre to take the money. There's no reason for him to come back and compete. I just don't want to see George St-Pierre fight. He's an absolute legend. Let's keep it that way. And there's no reason for him to come back and do this. Now, Nick Diaz is a totally different story. Now, Nick Diaz, we did see him fight. He is 40 years old. I was going to say we did see Nick Diaz fight against Robbie Lawler back in 2021, but that was not a great fight. That was a fight where Nick Diaz could not continue. I'm going to say that in the lightest way possible. Nick Diaz could not continue in that fight against Robbie Lawler. That was also a fight that was initially supposed to be at welterweight. Nick Diaz, partway through, I think it was like close to fight time, is like, it's going to be a middleweight fight. That is all the signs of someone that does not want to take a fight very seriously. I don't know, even the biggest Nick Diaz fans, I don't know how you watch that Robbie Lawler fight and say to yourself that I want to see Nick Diaz fight again. I think a lot of Nick Diaz fans, unfortunately, still believe that the same Nick Diaz that beat BJ Penn or fought Paul Daly or any of these fights, or even, George St-Pierre in 2013 is still the same Nick Diaz we're going to see today. I don't think that Nick Diaz is there anymore. I think he's long gone, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's, Nick Diaz is an absolute legend. He's had a great career, but I just don't have any desire to see Nick Diaz fight again. But I think the biggest thing here, we've talked about the fact that, again, you've got two guys who don't really need to fight anymore. Their first fight was not very good. If you go back and watch that fight, it's on Fight Pass, George St-Pierre and Nick Diaz, UFC 158. It was not good for a variety of reasons. Number one, it was not that exciting. George St-Pierre utilizes wrestling, neutralized Diaz the whole fight. And if you go look at the play-by-play, I wish I could show you the footage here. You look at the play-by-play, pretty much everyone scored that fight for George St-Pierre every single round. Like, it's not like it was a controversial fight and, we, all these years later, we want to see, a right wronged, or, there wasn't like a finish that was like a lucky punch or something. It was none of those things. It was just a long fight that was not that entertaining. I don't know what people think they're getting. And to me, this just looks very desperate on the UFC's part if they are trying to do George St-Pierre and Nick Diaz, because I just don't think it's necessary. Like, I get that you want to bring eyeballs to your promotion. I understand that you want it. It's UFC 300. They always want to make it a big deal, right? Like they had, UFC 100 had Brock Lesnar, UFC 200 obviously had some really big fights on there as well. It was Amanda Nunes, Miesha Tate, Brock Lesnar fought in that card. There's a lot of big fights that took place there, but I just don't think you need to do this, because you know what this reminds me of? Them potentially doing this fight between George St-Pierre and Nick Diaz. This reminds me of what Bellator was doing early on in Scott Coker's tenure, which was doing these types of fights. Ken Shamrock, Royce Gracie, Kimbo Slice, Data 500. Like, that's the type of fights that people were really not happy with Bellator about, because they could see right through this. They're like, this is, yes, there's names, but they're not fights that we want to really tune into. Now, I know they got a lot of ratings with this. You look at the ratings here, 1.96 million TV ratings, but I think to most MMA fans, they don't want to see fights like this. And I put this in the same category with Diaz and George St-Pierre. Now, granted, I think this is a much higher level fight than obviously Gracie and Ken Shamrock. They're much, they're younger than these two fighting. I want to be clear about that. I can already see someone in the comments saying, dude, what are you comparing Gracie and Shamrock to St-Pierre and Nick Diaz? But what I'm saying is, like, there's no, like, from my perspective, and I don't think I'm alone here, I just don't want to see this particular fight happen. In fact, I don't want to see George St-Pierre fight anyone. Like, as a Canadian, as a big fan of his throughout the years, I just want to see him stay retired. And if he wants to do grappling matches, that's fine. That's different. That's not the same as stepping in there and taking any damage. But just at 42 years old, I don't want to see George St-Pierre fight anymore. And with Nick Diaz, same thing. But again, if this is a grappling match, much different story. If they wanted to do this as a grappling match and have this as, let's say, like an opener on the pay-per-view, I'm fine with that. But the plan, by the sounds of it, and again, these are just rumors. This is all we're doing here today, is speculating. The rumor is, like I said, if Conor McGregor can't go for some reason at UFC 300, they want this as the main event, and that is not worth our money whatsoever. I just think this is a really cheap way of the UFC trying to get viewers, and I wish the UFC would focus more on building their cards and going more for quality. Here's something I'll throw at you guys right now, okay? Right now, if you look at the UFC calendar, there's a lot of really fun fights that are coming up over the next little bit. At the time of recording this, we have, sorry, I'm just going to show you guys the cards that are coming up here in the next little bit here, right? Like, we've got, just off the top of my head here, right? We've got Edwards and Covington coming up in a week or two. Ankalaev Walker, Strickland Duplessis, Dolidze Imovov's a great fight. Hermanson Pfeiffer, Volkanovski Topuria, and then there's O'Malley and Vera. Like, you could take some of these fights and put them on UFC 300 and no one's complaining. You put a Sean O'Malley on UFC 300, no one's complaining. You put a Volkanovski on UFC 300, no one's complaining. You know what I mean? Like, you kind of get where I'm going with this here. If they did not have so many events, and I know people are tired of me saying this, they could spread the wealth a little bit and they could stack a UFC 300. But this, to me, if they are in fact trying to do this George St-Pierre and Nick Diaz thing, this to me, again, is just a way for the UFC to try and get some cheap viewership here. I shouldn't even say cheap. It's just like it's a very unappealing way to get viewership to the hardcore fans. There will be casual fans that do want to see George St-Pierre and Nick Diaz fight, but those casual fans also think we're getting the old Nick Diaz that fought in Strikeforce, that we're getting the old George St-Pierre who was, you know, taking everyone down and having years of dominance as welterweight champion. Like, that's what they think in their head. But to those of us who watch MMA very closely, we know that the sport to some degree has passed these guys by, and that's why I don't want to see the fight take place. Let's say, you know, in my non-perfect world here, because, you know, I just mentioned how I'd like for them to spread the wealth a little bit and kind of stack the card that way. Let's look at some realistic options with the current UFC schedule right now as far as some fights that they can put together. So I just made this list real quick. Obviously, you want Conor and Chandler on that card. I don't know what's going on with Conor McGregor. Like, how is he not going to be on UFC 300? Like, if they can't put this together, there's got to be some really weird stuff going on behind the scenes, because it's been so long at this point. It only makes sense for them to do Conor and Chandler at UFC 300. Will John Jones be ready to go? That's one thing I wonder. You put John Jones and Stipe on this card. Again, a lot of people don't like that fight either. But you put John Jones on a UFC 300 card, people are going to tune in. John Jones could fight a broomstick, and people are going to still watch John Jones fight. So that in itself is, you know, again, something that would be a bit more appealing. I mentioned Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. Depending on how that fight goes, if there's no major damage there, that's in December, could we see the winner of that fight defend their title in April? I think that's entirely possible. So that's the welterweight division right there that could potentially be on there. You got to get Jim Miller on this card, right? Like, I know Jim Miller's got a fight coming up, but again, you kind of got to put him on there. That would be interesting. And, you know, this may be a little bit of wishful thinking here, but Strickland and Duplessis, if that fight takes place in January, and again, maybe they're healthy enough to fight in April. You don't know. Maybe they are. We're not sure. But, I mean, the plan all along, it seemed like, was the UFC to have Khamzat Chimaev fight for the middleweight title. You put him on UFC 300 against the winner of this fight. I think that's another solution that the UFC could come to. But those are the type of fights I would like to see, and I do not want to see them try and pull legends out. And the other rumor that we've been hearing, too, is that the UFC has been trying to get in touch with Brock Lesnar and also Ronda Rousey. That's the idea. They want to get this, you know, take advantage of the nostalgia and fans being sentimental and all that, and trying to put these fighters on the card. I just don't want to see it. This is the UFC. It's supposed to be the best organization in the world. I want to see the best fights. Like, if I want to go watch these guys compete at a high level, I'll go watch them on Fight Pass. I don't want to see them fight anymore at this point. This isn't like, you know, hockey where, you know, sometimes they'll do like the alumni games, and like, you know, they're not really, you know, you're not taking any major damage or anything. You're just going out there to watch them. But these guys, I mean, your job is to hurt each other. I just don't want to see St-Pierre and Nick Diaz fight anymore. I would rather just see them do something else. And again, I'm willing to compensate here and go for a grappling match, but I still don't think that should be like a headliner fight on UFC 300. So that is my thoughts on this. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. First off, what do you think of these rumors? Do you think they're true? Again, Dana White said super fight. That kind of narrows things down a little bit. This would kind of fit a super fight because they're both technically not really fighting much right now. Do you want to see this fight? If you honestly do, I would like to hear a good reason why you want to see this fight. I would like to have a discussion with you guys in the comments. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to either GSP or Nick Diaz. I want to be clear about that. They're both legends in their own rights. I would just rather see high quality fights on a UFC 300 card. And what are some fights you would like to see added to the UFC 300? And let me know your thoughts in the comments there. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @LynchOnSports. I'm James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.